So, okay, while we're waiting, I'll use the opportunity to welcome you all once again to the last day of this inspiring conference of ours. We had that pleasure to be awakened this morning, literally awakened and symbolically awakened by the very inspiring plenary lecture. And I hope that with this session, we will keep on this track of opening important questions and some really cool questions. This session deals with the issue of posthuman humanism, and it's something that we kind of tackled during previous 2 days. Like, what does it mean to be human? What's with the human values, human rights, human ethics in this post-human condition of ours? So we'll kind of keep on doing with that in this session. With us today are Dr. Nataša Lacković. She is a senior lecturer at the Department for Educational Research on the University of Lancaster, and Jelena Stojković, who is a research associate at the Institute for Pedagogy and Andragogy of University of Belgrade, and they will help us kind of get into this different possibilities of understanding childhoods and pedagogy in this post-human and relational era of ours. So, Nataša, the floor is yours.
Thank you. You can hear me really well, yes. So, hello everyone. Great to see you. And I have been really enjoying the conference. Fascinating talks and discussions and debates. Really inspirational. And now, I suppose something a little bit different. And you'll see why. And I'll just start with reference to an advertisement that we had in the UK from one of our telecommunication provider. I mean, it used to be Orange, and they had this advertisement with the promotional slogan saying, "Future's bright, future's orange." And I would now say, no, future is pink, okay? Because I have dressed in pink, as you can see, deliberately, because I wanted to raise questions about being in pink, being a woman, being from this particular region. Does it make me less intellectual in the eyes of some people? And trust me, I'm asking this question with a very good reason, because, you know, it's based on my experiences in higher education, experiences in an academic, etc., etc. And my presentation will be about the approach of relational or integrated relational pedagogy that I have been developing, but obviously it is related to and builds on many of the approaches that we have been listening to, including some of the ideas that Stefan was talking about this morning, the ideas that Carol was talking about yesterday, such as, you know, the pedagogy of mattering that I will be referring to, as well as the ideas that Rosie was talking about, such as, you know, self-other. But I will be approaching that from a semiotic perspective. Okay, so something, I suppose, a little bit different. And one just a piece of information, because there are only two of us today, we have a little bit more time for the presentation. So we will be actually going over our originally allocated 20 minutes. Okay, so I will be talking about the development of this idea of the relationality and what it means in the context of relational pedagogy in higher education. And I will be giving some examples, some potential possible mapping or modeling of that, and yeah, raising some questions as well. So first of all, what is relational? We're all talking about this, relational, but there are many relational approaches. So here you can see a color-coded list of different relational perspectives, such as the perspective of relational sociology. It's a really big field. Then we have the work that Carol has been developing with colleagues, such as the pedagogies of mattering, and also relational materialism. Then we have this, I would say, more classical notion of relational pedagogy that is building on the notion of social, like kind of human relationships, and the pedagogy of care. And we have the relational paradigm in sustainability research, for example, and I will just show you in a moment the mapping of relational approaches that the colleagues in green here did. And I'm also referring to the upcoming book co-written with my colleague Aline Olteanu, who is a philosopher and semiotician based in Germany. And the book is titled Relational Multimodal Higher Education, Digital, Social, Environmental Modalities of Knowledge, within the series of Multimodality with Rutledge. Okay, so this is the representation of the core of relational thinking according to Depelteau. And as you can see here, Depelteau suggests that what constitutes relational thinking is rejection of modern dualism, principles of processual thinking, rejection of substances, principle of interdependency, and principle of co-production. Very familiar, right? Sounds very familiar to the ideas that we have been listening to. Then, relational pedagogy as a more classical approach, I'd say, is a perspective of caring social relations between the teacher and the student. So at the center of it is the ethics of care. For example, Nell Nodding's pedagogy and ethics of care that Carol and colleagues are also referring in their work just cited here. And it is also a feminist perspective and is mainly about, or mostly understood, with regards to humans. And this is exactly what Carol and colleagues also referred to when they developed the pedagogies of mattering. And then I will build on that and then introduce the pedagogy of mattering that Carol mentioned in her presentation, but I'm just taking the liberty of interpreting it here as post-human extension of relational pedagogy, the classical one, stating that relationships matter, but also materiality matters as well, and now how the two relate. And here I have extracted a quote from that work. For both staff and students, relearning spaces create a sticky materiality, a very nice image in my head, a sticky material. A message of caring or uncaring can easily be materialized and felt. So how does this notion or feeling or even manifestation of materiality, so what kind of caring or uncaring practices or impact it has? And I would now build on the word message and move on to this idea that we are developing in the book on relational multimodal higher education, which I think is a more of a communication perspective to relationality. And this relational higher education practice or events, how we see it, are explorations of meanings and signs in education through and with different modalities of expression and existence, social, material, other than human, and digital. Of course, the ethics of care underpins it, but I would say that this ethics of care is observed through Peircean lenses. Charles Sanders Peirce, the American semiotician and pragmatist, and his approach, and people call it doctrine of agapism, is relevant here, and you would recognize that also from classical philosophy. Care and love should be the driving force for the evolution of science in education, and we have numerous heterogeneous science in education. We'll be dealing with that, and therefore, you know, the evolution of the world or worlds. Okay, so moving on, this is the mapping that the colleagues that were talking about the relational paradigm in sustainability research did to just show how many different approaches to relationality there are. And trust me, this is not the end. So they were thinking about, okay, let's map relational ontology, a kind of ontological thinking, then relational epistemology, relational ethics. And you can see there is posthumanism as one of the ways, one of the approaches to think about relationality. But we have many other approaches. Deep ecology, integral ecology, multi-species ethnography, obviously new materialism, process philosophy, then biocentrism, ecocentrism, and so on and so forth, affect studies, etc. So they all claim to have some sort of a relational flavor, if you prefer, or a relational approach to it. And this is the colleagues' attempt to map those relational discourses. And I'm referring to it because I think it's interesting, it's relevant if we are interested in relationality. Moving on, I would suggest a semiotic notion of relationality in education. And I'll start with the idea, I mean, what is semiotics? Why semiotics? It really points, I mean, if we take it as a study, although it looks like it's plural, at the criticality of interpretation, signification, sign processes, and events in educational encounters. And it asks those critical questions of who interprets and presents, and how, using which formats and modes of communication, why, towards what kind of meanings and interpretations, through which modalities, with what effect. In person semiotics, meaning is not separate from feeling, emotion, affect, and it has some effect. A semiotic notion of relationality, as you can see, in education, as we see it and interpret, is concerned with how knowledge practices, or you can call them events or encounters, observed as multimodality of science or multimodal science of and in education, whether experiences, events, resources, ways of expressing ourselves, so expression, experiences the world, how are they related to the social, material, and technological modalities of living? Because there are complex modalities that we engage with in order to live. So how do these considerations help us understand better what contemporary education is and what its futures could be? And I just want to say that semiotics as a very, it's really there at the fringes, at the margins of disciplines. It's not really regarded as a discipline. It's very interdisciplinary. It can inform, I think, all disciplines and interdisciplinary, metadisciplinary, cross-disciplinary approaches and discourses. And it's huge. Usually when I mention semiotics, people think of some sort of linguistic interpretation or analysis. And it's so much more than that. Cultural semiotics, social semiotics, biosemiotics, which I think has many interesting overlaps with the ideas that were shared by both Carol and Rosie and Stefan, zoo semiotics, digital semiotics. One of the approaches I've been developing with colleagues is post-digital semiotics. The work on post-digital semiotics will be published next year. And it's really much more than just that, just de Saussure's linguistics or the work by Roland Barthes or Umberto Eco. It's a massive field. So here is a representation of a relational pedagogy as a sign. So I'm observing it as this relational sign. So that's where, for me, relationality comes from. And it builds the left-hand sign is person-inspired relational sign diagram to signify, to suggest how we make meaning, how we or minds, I mean, that doesn't have necessarily to be human mind, how one mind makes meaning. So the sign is actually this triadic relation, intrinsic, relational, not separate, not disconnected, among these three kind of entities that are relational: representment, representation, the object that it refers to, and its interpretation. For example, if you have a photograph, and we use a photograph in education, that photograph is some sort of representation. It has some material form. It refers to something that it represents, its object, and it is interpreted by some mind when it's used in communication, in social media, in education. And then I tried to, I mean, it's just my thinking, it's a work in, you know, in development, to map then an idea of relational pedagogy as a sign. So the representational side is this multimodality through materiality, senses, really material and sensory forms of being. Images, words, the atmosphere. I mean, is it warm in here? Is it pleasant? Are we enjoying it? These kinds of feelings. Movement, how we move. Are we obstructed to move? And do we use movement, feelings, visions? And of course, there's always some educational idea there, because that's why it is educational at the end of the day. And then there is the object that these forms refer to, the forms in the real or imaginary worlds, the worlds of ideas. So that's what these material manifestations are they refer to something that either exists in the world or it's in our imagination, you know, like unicorns. And then the interpretations, different interpretations through educational practice and events, feelings and enactments of these, you know, representment and object relationship, and what this means when it is related to education. So it's my attempt to kind of map the relational pedagogy onto this idea of semiotic sign. And so how would it work in practice? That is always a big question. Okay, we have the meta thinking, the meta philosophy conceptualization, which is really important. And then now is how to bridge that thinking with practice. And we have heard so many great ideas. I mean, all of our speakers, and also at the discussions that you know, I have been hearing throughout the conference, really brilliant presentations. People, colleagues, friends, you know, they have suggested some possibilities how to enact this in practice. So Carol was giving us a lot of examples how that can be done through all the examples that she was talking about in her presentation, the illustrations, photographs that showed, you know, how you can explore the environment by actually walking around or moving around and trying to understand what is going on. Then we can use mapping techniques, moving, observing, writing, drawing, sketching, doodling, photographing, and so on and so forth. The point is that these expressions are multimodal in their nature, I think, and students are then becoming relational explorers and creators. So that's kind of my vision, and it can be done in so many different ways. Some of you have heard the work of some of the doctoral researchers. But I can be louder. Yes, maybe it's just out of batteries. This one? Okay. Yes, I cannot be confused. I'm joking. So you have probably heard of different examples of how this can be done. And I just want to then build on something that Stefan mentioned this morning about all these different relations when you think about, for example, meat production. You were referring to what is happening, what kind of factors or experiences come into play, relationalities when we think about it. And I will give you one example that I really, really like, and I'm sure some of you would be familiar with it, which is this. It's the work titled Anatomy of an Artificial Intelligence System. And the work is by Kate Crawford and Vladan Joler, that works at the University of Novi Sad here in Serbia. And this work of art is exhibited at MoMA in New York. They have actually adopted this work because of its, I would say, kind of visionary and very provocative explorations. And you can't really now, just from looking at this, understand what's going on, but I'll try to explain. Because what they tried to do, there is a PDF of this work, so you can actually zoom in to see those particular details. But they tried to map the relations in the world, like the material world, the world of social relations, of ethics, of all sorts of different, I would say, social, cultural, post-human, or ethical issues when it comes to the production of Amazon Echo. Okay, like you think of Alexa, right? So what comes into play when one produces it? And they refer a lot to the notion of new extractivism and neocolonialism. So how the forces of new extractivism and neocolonialism actually come to play to influence and contribute to something that we just engage with. You know, it's our mobile phone. It's Alexa that is in front of us. But what is invisible there, they try to visualize. And that's one of the examples that can be given to students to illustrate how mapping works, and actually just to invite them to think about these relations in the ways of mapping, in the ways of collage, putting things together, and inquiring these relations and relationships. Okay, so the Black Mirror, obviously. I mean, I'm sure many people present here have watched the Black Mirror series on Netflix, and I'm not a Netflix representative at all, but this is a really good series if we talk about the post-human, and if we talk about what the future of civilization, of humanity could be. And I'm providing this as an example. It's, you know, it's a film, it's an episode, but this is something that can be actually a resource, a trigger, a provocation for our students to think about the futures, what the futures could be, and the futures of education. And something that has been mentioned, and actually Rosie mentioned it, is the application of science fiction. I'm a big fan of Stanislav Lem. It's brilliant. And Stanislav Lem is a Polish science fiction writer, and I'm referring to the Futurological Congress, really fantastic book, and because it is science fiction black humor in a way, and it's a little bit of a dystopian idea, but with humoristic slant to it, which I think is very interesting. And what I'm showing here on the right-hand side is the above image, the top image is actually from the film interpretation, like the movie that built on the book. That this is the animation of Robin Wright, who acts actually in the film. And it is really about the future of humans. And it goes all sorts of different things. I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't have time, but you can check it if you're not familiar with it. It's really interesting. And the film is by Israeli director Ari Folman, and it's half film, half animation to actually signify this hallucinogenic future of the world where actually most people are kept in this state of hallucinations because the reality is too harsh. And it's very interesting. And this one is just an excerpt from Andrei Tarkovsky's interpretation of Solaris, which I think is also a brilliant, brilliant interpretation as well. Why these? Because they can serve as pedagogic triggers for thinking about the future. Okay, so something from my own work, and I'll just really go briefly through this because I have presented this and I presented this before at the previous conference. So the approach of inquiry graphics, which is using imagery in different forms to raise critical questions, engage students in creative and reflective and critical thinking about the world around them, and some concept that might sound really mundane, such as constructivism, in educational psychology. I invite students to provide their own interpretations through imagery. And this is a very classical representation of two school students doing an experimentation. And then I kind of worked with an illustrator to show that this image actually consists of so many different elements that have socio-historical, ethical, and all sorts of histories and meanings that we can unpack and then raise questions about what that means, the liquid, all the elements, the things that they're wearing, the goggles, and I could go on and on, especially with the goggles. Like if you just consider the goggles and the meaning for constructivism or constructivist engagement, what that means. So we act with our bodies, and what meanings do these acts have? And how is this all related to this concept that we need to learn or teach? Okay, so here is this meta or umbrella concept of integrated relational pedagogy, which is basically about probing, exploring, inquiring, imagining, critiquing, creating, and recreating knowledge in any higher education program, and hopefully, in the future, interdisciplinary programs, because there is I think, very rapid growth, I'm sure you would know, of interdisciplinary programs at the moment. In the UK, we have a few such initiatives, and I would not be referring to it, but if you're interested, you can ask me. I'm sure some of you have heard of it, but at the center is this semiotic approach that brings all these things together. So in relation to the social, to the material or environmental other than human, and to the digital. So just bringing it, integrating it all together. And around you can see floating relational ideas that also inform it. So at the center of it is this notion of multimodality, which means beyond one dominant modality of expression and identity. And I will pick on identity because I started my presentation with the provocation about identity, how we are perceived. So there is multimodality of expression and multimodality of identity. The expression is really based on applications of communication that is beyond one modality of expression. And we know that still, in education, communication is mainly linguistic, symbolic. So I'm saying, can we go a bit beyond that, what that means? And the identity is different modalities of the self and how these different modalities of the self actually relate to the other. So it is this idea of self-other that you really also find in post-humanist thinking, that I will be now just interpreting briefly, because I want to stop and give the floor also to Jelena, through the lenses of this multimodal identity, or what we call identity plus, if that makes sense. So just sharing that. It builds on the idea developed by Victoria Welby, who was a contemporary of Peirce, but obviously, because she was a woman, she was not that well recognized, or not yet that recognized as a semiotician, but she developed a line of thinking which is called significs. And she talked about ident as an idea of a multiple human, kind of multiplicity of selves that we all have within outside ourselves. And it builds on Suzanne Petrilli's work, who is, I would say, a fantastic semiotician based in Italy. And I've also referred to Ricoeur's work, One Self as Another. So this relationship between the self and other that is integrated, relational at all times. So this is what Petrilli says, building on Welby. So the ident refers to that part of human identity that resists the violence of monologism, univocality, the order of discourse, a kind of some sort of linear order, the said, and is other in terms of semiotic materiality in the continuous flow of change whose rhythm is beaten out by the succession, superimposition, multiplication, and cohabitation of our multiple selves. Now I will explain a bit more what that means. Of course, it's going beyond one fixed, singular, dominant sense of identity, whatever that may be, whatever. The material sense self is then related to I as the immaterial, so it's kind of self-other, and that conscious sense of one's being. Moving on, I'd refer then to the relationship between sense and intellect beyond the dominance of only one. It also builds on the work of Welby, where she distinguishes between sense and what she calls popularly kind of the mother sense, but then later on she actually replaced the term calling it primal sense and primary sense and the intellect, but not because they're separate. No, on the contrary, because she argues that one cannot be without the other. And we usually celebrate the intellect, and importantly, that one is not more important than the other. So scientific rigor, and I think this is very important, and gels really well with a lot of posthuman ideas in terms of we live in the world of instability, and instability is what we are surrounded by, but I think there is a propensity we are used to as human thinkers, I suppose, to seek stability, to seek something that we can be fixed to, and you know, kind of, it's almost something that we need to challenge all the time, because there is this kind of propensity to do that. And then that means that from this agapastic logical procedure for primal sense, we then need to have this courage to admit the structural necessity of inexactitude, instability, and crisis, so that we can allow that evolution of signs and subject and signifying processes. And then here is the representation or model of that identity plus or I plus that I referred to earlier. And you can recognize this triadic sign now, you know, between representation, representament, interpretation, object. And it basically says that we are more than just one version of ourselves. In semiotic terms, it explains that, and I'm sure you can find explanations and descriptions of these ideas in other writings or other thinking traditions. So it's relations and relationality that matters, this matrix of self, subjectivity and affect that comes to play. And I'm getting closer to wrapping it up. So what this relational pedagogy through I plus or identity plus may or could overcome, because maybe that's the question, are we supposed to overcome something or challenge? I mean, overcoming, you know, too big, too ambitious. The dualities, the binaries, either or, us, them, right? Us, them, a very politically charged approach, sense, intellect binaries, domination of these singular monologic identities. So it really challenges dominance of any singular identity, which is very present actually, especially in a lot of the media representations and interpretations. And there is a pressure in different contexts to identify in singular terms, whatever those are, so that we are in opposition to some other. But are we, and to what extent are we in that opposition? And I'd say that we can, and we do. One does focus on one strong aspect of one's identity, depending on the context. So I'm not saying it's easy to just go around and I'm this multiplicity of selves, hooray. No, it's really, really hard. And we do frame one particular version of ourselves. And I think Goffman would say, you know, we put on this presentation of ourselves depending on the circumstances. But then we need to engage our students in thinking that this multimodal being or identity plus or self-other, whatever you want to call it, is important. And that's how we develop. And there is obviously the political troublesomeness of this singular self that I'm kind of challenging through this discourse, because it leads to conflict, all these deterministic views, inflexibility, and yeah, I say yet politicians would oppose the idea of identity plus. So that's our challenge, because does it serve politics? Question mark. Because right, left, us, them, binary, non-binary, those tensions and conflicts, they are used to provoke and maintain power and control. We know that. So it could overcome sense intellect binary because it includes this so-called feminine sensibility as integral to intellect. Again, I'm repeating the challenge, so hard to gather momentum. And in the end, I think the work that we are all doing from all different perspectives is important. And it's a worldwide project because moving these boundaries is important. And this is just to refer to this upcoming book. I'll just skip it briefly. And I'm working with a group of students in Lancaster University, and we're launching at the end of October, so very soon, the podcast which is about the future of education. So a group of students are talking with different thinkers, futurist thinkers, Afrofuturism is included there, and what it has to do with the future of higher education. So lots of different perspectives, interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, disciplinary, about what the future is. So if you're interested, I can also send you the link. And thank you so much. Enough.
Okay, thank you very much, Natasha. You can keep your questions for later. I will give the floor to Jelena now, if we can just switch. Okay.
Hello, everyone. I was a bit silent in the previous days. I did not raise my hand to ask a question because I was waiting for this moment to present my theme and to open a discussion. My name is, once again, Jelena Stojkovic, and I'm the research assistant at the Faculty of Philosophy. And today I will play around and play with some of the posthuman concepts in relations to, in a relations to our topic, which is I, or as my colleague Dragana would say, I, in alpha voice, a voice from Power Rangers. Childbot, becoming the symbol. And as you may notice, there are many cinematic references, as we all do. And I will try to point out some of them and why did I use them, but I will not have enough time. So some of them in a presentation and some of them in the article I am writing with my computer. So I will begin with this concept of I. And it is the concept which Professor Karen Maris uses, and I felt connected to it, and I will explain briefly why. Because it is the assemblage of body, mind, and matter. And why I felt it connected to it? Because it made me think, with what am I traveling to this topic? With what geography, with what history am I traveling to this topic, which is, in a sense, the part of my PhD thesis? So I was going back to my childhood. Why? Because I was memorizing one particular day in my life. I was around 5 years old, and I was playing in my home garden. And to be precise, I am allergic to pollen, still am. But put that on a side, I was in the garden. And what I was looking for in that garden is earthworms. And why I was looking earthworms? It was a summer evening. You know, when you're a child, you have that, that smell in the air when you're a child, in that summer evening. You have that color that you are connecting to. You have that flower in front of you. You have that earthworm in front of you. And I was very particular, and I found one because some hours ago the rain was falling, and it was perfect time to look for the earthworms. I took the rock, I saw it, and the question sparked. How is it possible for the earthworm to still be alive, even though pressed with one big fat rock? And then I was thinking, and it came to my mind, okay, what should I do? Should I put the rock back? Would I kill the earthworm? Okay, the problem. But I did not put the rock back. I took the worm from the ground. And I do it in a way that I was putting the worm in my hand, and I was trying to feel it. And I was trying to do that in a relation to it. In a relation just not to a worm, but with a rock, with a garden, with a flower, with a smell, with a color. So that specific memory stuck to my head to this day. And it's making me move as a researcher. And that is a bit of my childhood I was sharing with you, but now I will try to connect it with this concept of I, because it made me think, how do I understand childhood in a relation to my childhood? You know, when you talk about the posthuman, you have a reaction as a snap. And I will ask for the video, and you have the reaction like this.
I am inevitable.
And you don't have anything else but a posthuman. But it's not the way. It's not the way. Because we are coming back to our histories, we are coming back to our geographies, we are coming back to our childhoods in order to reconfigure it. So Professor Maris is talking about the posthuman child, not with the intention of categorizing it, but with the intention to open a space for reconfiguration. And for opening a space in understanding a childhood as an aeon. And what does it mean? In a contrast of understanding the childhood as one certain period of a time in a chronological way, in understanding childhood as just one phase of humans, I underline humans' life, Professor Morris talks about the childhood as an aeon. And I'm connected to it because the childhood is an aeon. And what is an aeon? The aeon is a destiny. It is experience with a rock, with an earthworm, with a color, with a smell. It is connection, relation with others, which are not just humans. So that's why the childhood is powerful. It's intense. That's why we are growing up at this very moment. I myself am not identifying as a human, fully human. I'm not identifying as fully grown up or adult. So that's why this I concept, and I was joking last night, the colleague from our faculty had the OOO, so I had the I, which we can make a song from it. And that's why this concept is very important for my thinkings about childhoods. And how it brought me to my PhD thesis, which is around the chaos of digital technologies and childhoods. That's what I want to talk about in this slide. And about becoming a childbot. I'm not very much content with this childbot assemblage, but I can work with it, and I think we can work with it. And what I want to talk about is the becoming a childbot, a becoming in a relation with digital technologies. It have a bit of this transhumanist sense in which children are becoming a technological, because we are connected devising to their bodies. We are putting the devices in their rooms to track some processes, to check on their on processes of their bodies. So it's not just bodies, it's not just minds, it just not matter, it's all of that in combined, in assemblage. So it's a bit of becoming a technology, becoming with technology. And what I want to point out is we are accustomed on many categories. And when you read about the literature in a theme of digital technologies and early childhood education, you can come upon two different, and you guessed it, opposite perspectives. On one way, you have the perspective of an innocent child, a fragile child, innocent childhood, where digital technologies are tools which they may have the negative impact on children's learning and development. On the other side, you have the other perspective. We are the digital natives. Children are knowledgeable of technologies. They can use technologies as tools to become the best versions of themselves. They can become an adult. So you have two different opposite pictures, but they are talking the same story, because technologies are tools and nothing more. Tools in control of a human. So what posthumanist perspective or paradigm gave me, it is the apparatus of working with technologies and thinking about how childhood can become, or how children are becoming with technologies. And that's why I refer to a kinship, which is a term which Donna Haraway uses. And it's particularly important because becoming with technologies has that, I don't know, that big prophecy of a bit of a prophecy, you know, that children are becoming robots or cyborgs. But I would not focus on that. I would focus on becoming with technology, but not excluding the nature, not excluding the animals, not excluding everything else. And that's why I'm calling upon this art of noticing, also referenced on Professor Morris's work, because she says becoming a child is the art of noticing. And we have to make ourselves, reposition ourselves as adults, and to try to become a little, to become a child, and to become with a child. So that's why I wanted to talk about becoming childbot, and I have many more things to say about this topic, but I will stop myself here because I'm hanging on a thread because I'm playing around and playing with many concepts which I am yet to become to understand. So I will move to my next theme, and I will call upon becomings to assemble. Such as Captain America in the last movie of the Avengers. She called upon Avengers to assemble. And I will call upon becomings to assemble because I want to try to talk, and I'm underlining this try to talk, about the concept and ideas of a post-human perspective in early childhood education. And Professor Taylor was pointing out the Karen Barad's notion of knowing does not come from standing at a distance, but rather from a direct material engagement with the world. And it's connected to my heart deeply, because I think that the direct material engagement, you see how the digital is in the top of my language. So it's something I'm connecting to that playing with a digital. So, but that playing with digital is not excluding everything else. It's not excluding the adult, as I might say. It's not excluding the nature. It's not excluding the earthworm I was talking about, etc. So what Posthuman gave me as a researcher was a space for rethinking childhoods, space in the terms of touching, in the terms of a sense, in the terms of sense of belonging to the world, and where the digital is not the opposed to a real, where the digital is a world. And that's why I was referencing so much on the work of Professor Karen Maris, because she has one research that she has done, and I referenced with it. It's with the Giorza. And they were using with the 5- and 4-year-olds digital technologies as apparatus, as a way of children seeing with their skins and seeing with the eyes of a digital technology. And that's why I was moved. I was moved by that research, and I was moved by the question it raised when I was working on my presentation and when I was working on my paper, on my article. So there are many questions to to open, and I'm glad to do that with you. And I will to come to an end with my presentation soon. But I want to say that we as adults, as researchers, name it, we have to reposition ourselves and to start to think with children. I think that we are forgetting about that. And we have that, Nevena was talking about it, that alternative way of thinking at our faculty. And I think it's in the line with this posthuman practice, or if it's not yet, it will be, I hope so. So that's why I wanted to open this topic and to open a space for learning with children and learning with world in general. So, of course, it wouldn't be me if I did not have one more question that was lingering and still is lingering. And I was asking myself, are we a part of those reconfigurations of childhoods? We as researchers, as I may say, or do we tend to position ourselves as objective bystanders who interpret childhoods? I know that this seems like the opposite I was talking, and I was trying to go beyond that, but this question is stuck still here. And at first I was thinking, yes, I'm the objective bystander who interprets childhood, but am I? And who am I? And what I am coming with to this topic. So I will finish my work or my presentation with that question. And I will ask you now if you have any or many questions. I'm glad to open a discussion, and I want to thank you for your attention. And I'm sorry for my English.
Okay, so we can leave this slide. It's great for Q&A. So you had the opportunity to hear two great presentations. So can we start with some questions, maybe? Okay, here you go. In the first line.
So my question is for Natasha, and very much actually enjoyed both the presentations by Yelena and Natasha, and raised a lot of really thought-provoking questions. I wanted to ask about one of the challenges that you had mentioned towards the end of your presentation, and that is other disciplinary traditions have perhaps similar ways of thinking about multiple identities, multiple selves. And one that came to mind that has, really embedded itself in many disciplines is intersectionality. And beyond sort of disciplinary preferences, could you perhaps make a conceptual argument or sort of an argument why the semiotic relational approach perhaps yields more for you, at least in the context of your work, than say an intersectional approach?
Thank you so much. This is a really interesting question. And I, first of all, would say that the semiotic approach is not the only approach. It's not like any other approach, is not the only answer. And I think it can actually embed, and it does embed, intersectionality. And I think the model, if you remember, but I did run through it, I must admit, of the identity plus or multimodal identity, I think that actually embeds the ideas of intersectionality. And actually I do talk about it with my students because I teach on different postgraduate programs, and one of those programs is in education and social justice. And many students who are on the program are very much interested in intersectionality, and they actually come from that background and from that interest. So we then put the two together, because for me, why semiotics? Because semiotics is so flexible, can be combined with almost any school of thinking. I mean, in my opinion, and I have seen that happening. And there are so many different scholars that actually take semiotic approaches, because as I mentioned earlier, at the beginning of the presentation, it is a really huge field, and I can live 100 years, but I would not be able to read everything that is written on semiotics. So that's why I was drawn to it, because it spoke to me through those relational science and relational approaches to how we interpret the world. And then it moved the boundaries of who interprets. And for example, in biosemiotics, you have that notion of Umwelt, which is a German world, which actually represent environment, but from different points of view. So it's a kind of multiple perspectives to the experience of an environment where everything is considered. So yeah, I hope I'm answering your question. Am I? Okay, thank you.
Okay, some more questions? Last line.
Okay, just to start with, I mean it in a very good way, but from traditional point of view, your like multiple identity plus sounds a little bit like schizophrenia, right? Yeah. So well, I'm not talking telling that it's about it's a bad thing, because all of us are a little bit schizophrenic, and we know that. But I'm wondering, where's the that like the fine line? Where's that like healthy from unhealthy differentiation?
Thank you, Anna. I think this is another great question, and I think the notion, and I did refer to that on my slide because I thought, well, I'm sure that will come up as a question. The point is not to now thrust ourselves at all times. As you remember, I mentioned, we're not walking around and, saying we are all this multiplicity of selves, identity plus, because that is rather hard, and almost it's not how we function in terms of functionalism in life. So you're basically referring to practicalities of life, the functionalism, the, these kind of everyday realities that we have to deal with. And I think this is a trajectory. It's a processual kind of approach to it, because you start from some more singular approaches to identity, if you want to frame it, because I referred to Goffman's work about, the management of presenting ourselves in the public. So today, what am I foregrounding? My academic self today, and a little bit of being a woman, a little bit of, being from this region, etc. So you wouldn't say that today I'm just one identity. You just wouldn't, because I'm not. So I hope I'm answering your question, because I think we cannot underestimate those complexities of selves. And I think the crisis in the world happens because we do, and because that's the kind of leading approach in the media, potentially in traditional education. And I think it's a balanced approach to going from the singular into the multiple. So that's why actually identity plus, because I can go and explore in between, and I can choose to foreground one and then expand into other. But I think closing our eyes to that notion that, I'm more than just one version of myself or one identity that sometimes is foregrounded, I think that is difficult. I mean, not difficult, but maybe that needs changing. I mean, have I answered your question? Okay, thank you.
Dragana, first then Olga.
You know what I mean? Okay, I have a question for Jelena. Yes. You mentioned it before, but I would say like this. where is our responsibility as, I don't know, teachers, researchers, practitioners, all kinds, to refrigurate the childhood? First, I'm asking because why do we need that? For who? And the second maybe question is how to do that? Not as a recipe. I know that you cannot give me the recipe because we don't believe in that kind of structure. But in everyday life, when we are with children, when we are don't have fear to affect and to be affected, as Nevena says yesterday. So why is that important? Just to emphasize that, and maybe this is something like to make bricolage of our answers, not to have a recipe, or I don't expect you to give me just one strict answer. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I was sensing this question coming. So my point of view on this topic is that when you are open to affect and to be affected, it does not exclude responsibility. It includes being responsible, which engages ethics in deeper level. So it is indeed very much needed to be afraid as an adult, as a child, as a earthworm. So, and I was afraid when I came to this topic. That's why this little spider is here, because I have the irrational fear of spiders. That's why I was hanging on a thread. And I think that that kind of a interaction that we have when we open ourselves for that kind of reassurance, goddamn, how to say it, to that kind of a relational becoming, ethics are not excluded. So we have the responsibility, but we are sharing that responsibility with others, which are humans, but also non-humans. So, and in a relation to your question about the implication, some strict, I do not have that. I just have one thought that I'm developing with. So, I think that this is the field where we have to make an effort to becoming little. But not in a sense just becoming a child, but becoming with every single thing that we are accustomed to attentionally or non-attentionally exclude. I would again reference on my memory and on my memory to an earthworm. So that's my answer, and thank you for your question.
Olga next.
Okay, I have a bit of a phenomenological reflection on Yelena's talk. Specifically, your last question of whether you, as a researcher, are an objective observer of your own childhood. I think maybe your research could benefit from the phenomenological perspective, because this is precisely the study of subjective lived experience.
Yes.
And it has a lot to say about our relation towards our own past and the becomings as well. So the idea is that we are constantly gaining new experiences, and based on this we are constantly also related to our own past and reconfiguring our own past. And in relation to our childhood, this would mean that from our present we are able to look back on our past and our childhood and to reevaluate moments, of of our childhood from this new perspective that we gained. But this is still our own past. We are still the subjects of this story, and the change comes from in the way that we are related to it. We also change who we are in the present. So this kind of dynamics, dialectics is going on.
Yeah, you have, thank you for your input, because yes, you have that a subject dimension. And I was trying to go beyond that with this small I, because when you don't write it in big I, as a rational individual subject would do, but you cannot exclude your own experiences. But I'm not seeing them as not relational. They are relational, because I was becoming back then and now, because the past, the present, and the future are intervened at this very moment. And that's why I'm not going back, I'm becoming. I am becoming at this very moment, and I'm traveling with my childhood in every single point of time. And that's why that subjective experience was important for me, because it was not just mine. It was mine as well as that earthworm. And if I had my camera with me, but I didn't, my childhood did not include that thread, I would catch it with an eye of that apparatus. So.
Okay, we have the next question here.
I'll try to be brief, but it's for Yelena also. Okay. It's a thought. It's very provocative. I know. I have a question about where this idea of being with comes from. What philosophical tradition are you borrowing from here? That's my first question. It's just a technical one.
Okay. Do you mean a specific tradition? Mm-hmm. Because I was playing with a lot of perspectives. I pointed out the transhuman, but it's not the only. I think that I'm most focused on this new materialism, the critical posthumanism, and also what Nevena was talking about, the Karen Barat's intrarelational thoughts on quantum physics. Also, I cannot point out one specific tradition that is related to.
I thought you might have been getting it from Heidegger, because he has this idea of care and being with, but so it's not a Heideggerian.
No,
okay.
No, it's not.
Genealogy. And I have a problem with being with and becoming.
Okay.
Because I don't think that it's provocative, and it's a wonderful presentation, by the way, and your English, don't worry about it.
Thank you.
It was really lovely to kind of follow your thoughts, but I have this, I think we should distinguish between becoming child and being with. And I also want to ask you, being with for what reason? Because when we give children technology, it's usually because we want them to, for example, my child was born in 2019 and turned 1 year old when the pandemic happened. Okay. And I was finishing my dissertation. So she has a tablet, which she watches because I need to work.
Okay.
This is the reason she interacts with the tablet. I have put her, and we all reflected on it. Every parent I knew in the pandemic started writing little reflective pieces that they wanted to publish in the New York Times about why they're making their children watch their tablets for so long. But that's, in a way, I think using technology so that I can distract it's like childcare kind of thing, right? But then also children interact with different types of technology for different reasons. I mean, one of the reasons is optimization. And also the idea that through technology we can better control the conditions under which our children live. For example, there's all this technology when you have a baby, preventing the baby from suffocating, monitoring the heartbeat. We are quantifying and following and collecting data on our children. So that is doing something to children too. So I have, like, I see that, I understand the idea, but I'm worried also about these other ethical implications, because we're doing these things to children. Children aren't autonomous beings. We cannot become children. That's my problem with this becoming I, and being with? So that's my, sorry. It's
Okay, I expected that question because, okay, I'm living in the future, you know? So many science fiction movies, I have to live in the future. So, you know, we have that, I call upon that alternative way of thinking, because the way we as a adults see child is affecting the way we are becoming. Because if you see a child as a fragile, as a being that is not autonomous or does not have autonomy, your doings are created by that thought. You know, that's the relation I was coming for. It is a one direction. It is what I as adult am thinking about child, but not what the reality of child is. You know, when we barrier our, or where we are barrier, you know, when you put a barrier to your thought by going for that narrative of child being naive or not having a autonomy, you're challenging the ways in which you can interact, and those ways are, in my experience, one-directional. But when you are focusing on this becoming with a child, you have the way around. You have the space for turning things around. You have the space to open a possibility for a child to open a question about the death. Because childhood is not just the flowers, heart, and suns. It's about the death. It's about the troublesome. It's about the dark thoughts. I had the experience of child in a very innocent situation asking me and talking about the experiences of being abused with by his granddad, because we are excluding as adults those experiences that children have, their realities. And when I talk about the child, I'm not positioning myself as a child-centered, to be explicit. I'm positioning myself with a child. But I'm not excluding my position as an adult who has much more experience, who has much more... I'm trying to share my position with a child, to become together, not excluding the child. So that's my answer. I'm not sure I answered enough, but that's my thought on this topic.
Professor?
Hi. I really enjoyed both presentations. Can
Thank
you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. They were both really, really thought-provoking and imaginative. I just want to say, well done, Natasha, kind of bringing together so much in terms of relational pedagogies. It was really, really exciting to see that. I've just got a comment and a question. And my comment is very similar to the point that you raised, really, which is that I was thinking about, okay, how does this ident plus relate to post-human subjectivity? So that's one thing. But then it's also, how does it relate to sort of Deleuze's idea of individuals and multiplicity? And I was, having lost my kind of interest in semiotics about 20 odd years ago and only know it through Barthes, etc., I was kind of enlivened by the fact that, you know, gosh, it's grown into this huge field that I didn't know anything about. So thank you for introducing that to me. But so that's a comment, really, what is unique and specific to semiotics in terms of thinking about the multiplicity of identity. But I really wanted to go back to where you started, which was being in pink. And as a child who hated pink, and has now come to kind of like pink as an adult, I want to think about that in relation to your question, which was, does it make me less intellectual? And I think there's a whole series of questions here about the bodies of women and how they adorn themselves, ourselves, the choices that and these are material choices. You know, I thought this morning, shall I put this particular dress on? Because it will signify in a particular kind of way. And I say that having gone through sort of my teens and my 20s, not even owning a dress. So I think these kinds of things are really, really significant. But so I would like you to talk a little bit about this question about, which is a feminist question, does it make me less intellectual? And what does that mean in terms of being an intellectual? So.
Thank you. This is really great. And actually, I would like to say that when I was a child, I also hated pink. So, and I mentioned that the reason why, and I was just joking about it yesterday, like, you know, should I wear pink tomorrow? Because I think it's challenging some of the, what is termed in semiotic iconic or stereotypical ideas or signification, because you did mention the word signification, which is actually a semiotic word. And at the center of semiotics is how things are interpreted. And I think the question of interpretations, like all the questions I was raising, are surrounding interpretation, who interprets, in relation to what, for what reasons, in the context of education, are important. So what is interesting for me, and I'm now going back to your first question, I think, and I will get back to the pink. I'd say kind of attractiveness of semiotics for me is because it is so flexible and it offers this triadic, because I'm building on Persian model, which also is to some extent maybe less known about or less popular. It depends, because you have very different schools of semiotics that even some people would say like clash between themselves in their approaches, which is very interesting. I mean, this goes to the debate between, you know, transhumanism and posthumanism, etc., etc. And there are such things within semiotics as this huge field. But I was really drawn to the question of interpretation. And I think that's what semiotic offers, which is sometimes undermined. And it's, you know, the triadic relation, because I could go on forever here on the rootedness of a lot of, for example, Enlightenment thinking being in the Saussurian dyadic sign, which is more, you know, it excludes the third thing, like what the thing refers to, if that makes sense, like the object. It's more kind of direct relationship between, you know, signifier and signified. But what about the third thing? So when I stumbled across some of the interpretations, again, I mean, we're all ourselves interpreting the work of others. And I think interpretation is so important. And the questions surrounding interpretation and representation are really important. That's why I choose semiotics. I mean, for me, it works for me because I think it's also flexible, because that triadic sign is very flexible. And I'm saying that because I have been working with absolutely amazing, wonderful doctoral researchers, Geraldine over there, just hi, Geraldine, and a lot of other doctoral researchers at Lancaster University who actually tweak and flex this multimodal sign for different purposes in different contexts. And I can just go on listing social care, student engagement, student employability. I mean, really concepts that actually sound very rigid. And then I tried to break them. And I think semiotics has really, as a field of study, has really moved from being actually quite rigid, because that's the Syrian semiotics now, by a lot of semioticians, like kind of contemporary semioticians, is observed as rigid, as bounded, as very fixed. Whereas there is a kind of new movement which is quite open, flexible, and really is based on these relationalities and how actually we can develop, interpretations of different terms, different ideas. I mean, I hope I'm answering the first question, like why semiotics, and then the idea why pink would be less intellectual. It's not less intellectual. I mean, it's just the possibility of being seen as such. And there is, I think, a huge amount. I mean, I'm not sure whether it's huge really, but there is research on the meaning of colors, and pink has this connotation of being, I mean, we just humorously joked like being girly. But what does girly mean? Is that less intellectual? I think that's the question. I want to challenge that, actually. I mean, am I answering your question?
It's ostensibly a really simple question.
Yes. Exactly. Okay, we can continue the conversation, definitely. But I think here the notion of pink is so many things. I think it's pointing at that. Like, it's not just one thing or one singular idea of what it is, but it's so many other things. So I'm trying to challenge something that could be seen as a stereotypical notion of what it is, but that's why it's important to actually raise that. Like, is it or is it not? That's why I'm asking a question, because how can I know? I mean, how can I know what you're thinking? How you're interpreting everything? How you're interpreting me? Do you know what I mean? So that's why. Yes.
Women's bodies are always a problem.
Exactly. Exactly.
And in the academy, they're also a problem. So anything that you do, you've got to do it twice as well as men in order to
Exactly.
what you want to do,
Exactly.
what you want to get to. So pink kind of signifies in that. We want to see.
Exactly.
We want to hear your side. So when the person watches, hear your response. So if we cannot hear.
So you need a microphone for recording, not for us here, but for recording.
Yes, for the recording, just the comment, Carol, if you can just repeat.
I have to remember what I said now.
Okay, if I remember well, you are positioning the question in the tradition of feminist thinking, and this idea of gendered bodies, or what the bodies mean and what they are. And actually, this is exactly why I started with it. Exactly why, because I think, and I have experienced that. I show up and, I like to dress up and fashion, etc. And then sometimes people comment, oh, I like your dress, but they don't say, your ideas are really groundbreaking or something like that. And do you know what I mean? And I think that also refers to some of the idea of Nick Susanis. I mean, Nick is someone who was probably the first person to do a PhD in the form of graphic novel at Columbia University. And he always refers to this notion when people tell him, when he says he's a mathematician, that's his background. I mean, he's very good in mathematics. They say, oh, you're so clever. It's so amazing, so smart. And then when he says he's an artist as well, they say, oh, you're so talented and creative. So you see the binaries already being created. So I think actually I'm completely with you on that. That's the reason why I started with the pink, to say, well, this is how our bodies as female academics is observed and gendered and framed. And we need actually to break that. We need to challenge that.
Thank you. Maybe we should all reclaim the pink then.
Yes, reclaim the pink.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, if you'd like. First one, first row. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So may I? Because I had the microphone for a while.
Okay.
So I just had a sort of follow-up question to yours. And by the way, I really loved your dress from yesterday, Carol. So, and thank you. Yeah, also wearing pink. So I was wondering more about this positionality of the body. And so this is a complex question, and maybe we can talk about it later more. Yes. Right? But you also mentioned at some point that positionality of not just being a woman, right? And I think we all agree that all of us women in academia have a very conflicted relationship with that. But also the positionality of being from a certain place, right? And I'm from Colombia, so I assume, you know, maybe it's just a very different relationship, but we both share some kind of relationship with coloniality, right? So as being women from the global south, that also changes, right? Speaking the language of the metropole, all of us here, right? Yes. Trying to communicate. So I was wondering about that aspect that you didn't talk about a lot. And also in terms of how do we think about semiotics? Do we need new words to talk about this? Do we need a new language? Do we need to actually reconfigure this? Because I work on decolonial thought, and this is a question I ask myself all the time, right? Is it impossible? Because already the idea of thought is inscribed in some methods and requirements that maybe don't give space for thought, right? So I know it's complex. It's a lot of questions, so maybe we can talk about it later, but thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, we can, because I know we're running out of time, so I'll be very super brief. I think the questions that you're raising are so important, and I just very briefly touched upon it when I referred to neocolonialism and new extractivism in that presentation. I don't know if you saw, but you were there by Crawford and Yoller. And I think this could be a way of kind of doing these creative practices that actually raise questions that you have just mentioned. So, you know, I don't want to kind of go on forever, so thank you.
Okay, so let's just give the Caitlin an opportunity for this one last question, and then we'll finish.
One thing that I wanted to say is that I really appreciated the pop culture references in your slides, and something I've been thinking about at this conference, but it just in general, is the adult relationship with pop culture and popular tools as well, like a disdain for TikTok, a disdain for influencer culture, and that children want to grow up to be influencers. That's like as they're doing surveys in the States of students, they say they want to be an influencer when they grow up. And so I'm wondering if you've thought about or encountered this idea, and I think maybe it's something that I think about as I age, because I still feel like I have a connection to that popular culture or that youth culture. Where does that disdain come from? And then how can we maybe, because then as we have children, maybe in one project I'm working on with faculty members with Minecraft, and that's something that's very much seen as like a youth game, and a lot of adults try to play because they want to connect with their children. Is there a way to grow up without abandoning that connection to youth or popular culture or tools, so that we don't position ourselves as an outsider looking in?
Okay, thank you for your question. It is a good question. I think that it is on the path of a thought which we touched upon. And I think we don't have to exclude anything, including these pop culture references on many movies, not just the popular ones that we are encountering at this very moment, but from our subjective histories, if I may say so. So in order to connect with or becoming with a children, I think we can and should put those experiences and those interests in use. For example, I was encountering with one 5-year-old which played Minecraft, and I don't know anything about Minecraft. And that was the encounter where I was called upon to become a little, to hear his authentic experience, to learn from it, but not divided from the context in which we were. We were outside, not connected to a computer, not playing the game, but talking, encountering about the game. So I think that having or not having experiences or interests in many topics is the problem. We have to, when we position ourselves as in a terms of with, not between, we open ourselves for the encounter, for that kind of a discussion which opens spaces both for us, for children, and for many other actors, I say. I think I answered your question. Thank you.
So that will be the last question for this session. It's time for a break. Just two brief informations. One is that we continue by the agenda at 12:45. And the other is, sadly, there was a mistake in agenda, so this is not the lunch break, this is a coffee break. So we will meet here back again or on the other sessions at 12:45. And thank you all once again for wonderful questions and presentations.